You always hear the same stories. The ones about triumph, consistency, freedom. The stories of traders who made it. The survivors. But what about the others? The ones who disappeared quietly after the same journey, who followed the same rules, and still lost everything. We rarely talk about them because their stories don't sell. They don't fit the narrative of mastery. But the truth is, without them, the picture is incomplete. Every winner stands on a mountain of untold stories. Every success we admire is shaped by a silence we refuse to hear. And somewhere in that silence, the real lessons live. This is a reflection on survivorship bias, the quiet illusion that shapes how we learn, how we compare, and how we forget the cost of every victory we celebrate. Listen closely, because sometimes the truth isn't found in the ones who survived, but in the ones who didn't. It's easy to admire success. We all do. We look at the winners, the stories, the screenshots, the interviews, and we think this is what mastery looks like. But no one ever talks about the ones who didn't make it, the thousands who followed the same path, believed the same lessons, tried just as hard, and disappeared. I used to believe the stories of the winners too. I studied them like maps. Every quote, every strategy, every piece of advice, I absorbed it as if success were transferable. If they did it, I thought then I can do it too. And for a while that belief felt like strength. It kept me motivated, confident, focused. But over time, I realized something quietly terrifying, that most of what I was learning wasn't truth. It was survivorship bias. The market hides its graveyard well. You don't see the broken accounts, the deleted charts, the people who left silently. You only see those who stayed the survivors, and you mistake their story for the whole truth. But it's not. It's the edited version of reality. A version that only shows what endured, not what was lost. When I first started trading, I filled my mind with stories of success. Consistency, they said, comes from discipline and patience. I believed it completely, but no one ever told me how many disciplined traders still failed, how many patient traders still ran out of capital, how many talented traders simply couldn't bear the emotional weight anymore. The market doesn't just test your skill, it tests your capacity to exist inside chaos. And most people don't last long enough to write about it. I remember scrolling through forums and social media reading success stories like scripture, how I turned $500 into $50,000, how I went full-time after 1 year, how I finally became consistent. Each story lit a spark inside me. But what I didn't realize was that for every one of those stories, there were 1,000 others who tried the same thing and failed quietly. Their lessons were buried beneath the noise. And because no one tells their story, you start believing that failure means you're doing something wrong, instead of realizing that failure is the default path and survival is the exception. The problem with learning only from survivors is that you learn from incomplete data. You learn the habits that happen to work once without seeing all the times those same habits destroyed someone else. You copy the risk management of someone who's thriving, not realizing that their personality, timing, and emotional state are completely different from yours. You start to imitate confidence without understanding context, and soon you're chasing ghosts. I used to think that if I just found the right mentor, the right winner to learn from, I'd shortcut the struggle. But I didn't see it then. The winner's story isn't a roadmap. It's a survivor's memory. And memory is selective. People don't remember every moment of doubt, every close call, every bit of luck that kept them from blowing up. They remember what fits the narrative of triumph. They tell the story in a way that makes sense, not in a way that tells the full truth. That's how the bias works. We remember what survived and forget what didn't. And the more we hear those stories, the more we start believing that the survivors are different, smarter, more disciplined, destined. But they're not. They're human, and humans get lucky. It's a strange thing how much luck hides behind the word skill. Every great trader has moments of grace they'll never admit were luck. A random bounce that saved them, a news spike that went in their favor, a slip they didn't pay for, and because they survived those moments are rewritten as proof of mastery. But if the same luck had gone the other way, they'd be gone, and someone else's story would take their place. When you only study survivors, you start to develop a dangerous illusion that outcomes equal wisdom, that the people who won must have done something fundamentally right. But the market doesn't reward right. It rewards probability and sometimes just timing. There's no divine logic in who survives, just a mixture of preparation, temperament, and chance. I didn't understand that for years. I chased winners trying to decode their patterns. I copied their journals, mirrored their trade logs, adjusted my risk to match theirs. But the more I followed them, the more lost I became. Because the truth is, success stories are comforting. They give you hope. But hope without realism becomes delusion. And delusion is where most traders quietly drown. I started realizing how deep the bias went the first time I saw a mentor disappear. He wasn't famous, but in my eyes, he was the definition of control. Calm, disciplined, logical. Every post he made carried certainty. I studied his methods religiously. Then one day he stopped posting. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. Later, someone mentioned he'd lost everything in one overnight move. He was one of the unseen. And yet everything I'd learned from him had been shaped by the illusion that he had conquered the market. That moment cracked something open in me. I began to question all the lessons I'd accepted as truth. Were they truths or survivorships dressed as wisdom? Was I learning trading or learning storytelling? The mind loves clean narratives. We want to believe that success follows patterns, that if we do A, B, and C, we'll reach the same D. But life isn't math, it's noise. And the market amplifies that noise until all you can hear are the voices of those who made it through. The quiet ones fade into static. It's unsettling realizing that the people you idolize may not actually know why they succeeded. They have theories, stories, reflections, but the full truth is lost even to them. Their memory is biased by survival. They look back and connect dots that only exist in hindsight. It's human. We all do it. But in trading, that bias becomes lethal because it tricks you into thinking success is repeatable when it's not exactly. I remember the first time I noticed how this bias distorted my emotions. I was watching interviews with successful traders, the kind of calm, confident people who seemed completely in sync with themselves. They spoke about mindset, patience, gratitude. I admired them. But I also started to feel something darker: comparison. I began measuring my worth against people I didn't even know. When they said I never overtrade anymore, I thought then I'm failing, because I still do. When they said it's all about letting go of emotion, I thought then I'm not evolved enough. But I never stopped to ask how many traders once said the same thing right before losing control, because they don't get interviews. That's the cost of survivorship bias. It replaces self-awareness with comparison. You stop trading your truth and start chasing someone else's highlight reel. And the moment you start doing that, you lose touch with the only data that actually matters, your own. I remember the day that realization sank in. It was late, charts still glowing, my notes spread across the desk. I looked at the pages filled with quotes and copied strategies and realized none of it was truly mine. I wasn't building a system, I was assembling fragments of other people's luck. And deep down, I was trying to recreate their emotions, their calm, their certainty, their victory. But that was the illusion. You can't inherit another trader's calm. You can only earn your own through awareness. From that night on, I started writing differently. Instead of copying advice, I began recording my failures, not to glorify them, but to understand them. I wrote down the setups that didn't work, the emotions that broke me, the trades I should have skipped but didn't. At first it was painful, humbling in a way that burned. But as the pages filled, something shifted. I realized that my mistakes were more honest teachers than any winner's story could ever be, because they were mine. They had context. They had truth. Every failed trade, every emotional breakdown, every missed opportunity, they weren't signs of weakness. They were data points, pieces of a map that only I could read. And in between those lines of failure, I started to glimpse something real, my actual learning curve. Not the borrowed one, not the perfect version I'd seen online, the raw, unedited one, jagged, imperfect human. The survivors show you how high you can climb. The fallen show you where the cliffs are. And if you ignore the fallen, you'll walk straight off the edge believing you're invincible. That's the cruel part of survivorship bias. It flatters your ambition while hiding the dangers that made the survivors cautious. The market isn't a meritocracy. It's a filter. And filters don't choose based on virtue, they choose based on variance. Whoever survives isn't necessarily the best sometimes. They're just the last one standing. The sooner you accept that, the freer you become. Freedom doesn't come from idolizing the survivors. It comes from honoring the truth of all who didn't, because hidden in every failure are the quiet lessons that keep you alive longer than luck ever will. The more I studied the unseen side of trading, the clearer it became. What we call wisdom is often just the story told by those who survived long enough to tell it. They speak with authority because they're still here, but survival itself can be a kind of bias, a lens that bends the truth until only success remains visible. I started to see this bias everywhere, in books, in videos, in interviews, in every 5 rules of trading success post that promised clarity. They all had the same quiet lie beneath them, that success was inevitable if you followed the right process. But what they didn't say was how many people followed that exact same process and never made it. How many did everything right but were caught on the wrong side of randomness. For a long time, I thought randomness was something to be eliminated. That mastery meant complete control. But the more I traded, the more I realized control is an illusion that dissolves the moment you start believing in it. No one controls the market. At best, we learn to dance with uncertainty without letting it consume us. And that realization changed how I saw the winners. I stopped idolizing them. I started humanizing them. When you humanize the survivors, their stories shift. They stop sounding like perfect plans and start sounding like journeys. They stop being destinations and become warnings. I began listening differently. When a trader said I trusted my edge, I asked, how many times did that edge nearly destroy you before it worked? When someone said discipline changed everything, I wondered, how many times did you break discipline before you meant it? Because no lesson is clean. No wisdom is without blood. The traders who tell you their story have already survived the worst part of it. They're speaking from the safety of hindsight. But when you're in the middle of your own storm, you don't have that luxury. You're not writing a story yet. You're living through the noise, and that's what makes your experience sacred. One night I looked through my old journal entries, the ones I used to write when I still believed that success had a secret formula. Page after page was filled with notes about other people, what they did, how they traded, what their win rates were, what books they recommended. It was a collage of borrowed certainty. And yet between those lines, I saw my own voice trying to break through small reflections, half thoughts, little questions like, why did I feel calm that day? Or why did I force that trade? Those were the sentences that actually mattered. They were the start of awareness. I realized then that learning from others isn't wrong, but learning only from those who survived is incomplete. The real wisdom is in the blend the successes that inspire you and the failures that humble you. Without both, you lose balance. You start chasing illusion instead of understanding truth. There's a quiet dignity in failure that most people never see. Failure doesn't lie to you. It doesn't promise formulas or shortcuts. It just holds up a mirror. It shows you where you're fragile, where you're proud, where you're not yet honest with yourself. If you can sit with that reflection without turning away, you start to grow in ways no success story could ever teach you. The most dangerous thing about survivorship bias is that it replaces humility with certainty. It tells you if they did it, you can too. But it never says if they failed, so could you. And the truth is you can. Every single one of us can. No amount of knowledge or skill erases that risk. It only makes us more aware of it. That awareness is what changes everything. It turns imitation into insight. It replaces envy with empathy. You stop comparing yourself to others and start learning from the whole picture, from both the light and the shadows. Over time, I stopped chasing the dream of becoming a survivor. Instead, I started practicing the art of staying aware. That's a different kind of survival, not the kind built on luck, but the kind built on consciousness. It's the survival of self-understanding. Because in trading, you don't beat the market. You just outlast your own illusions. I began looking at charts differently too. They stopped being symbols of opportunity and became mirrors of my psychology. Every line told a story, not a price, but of patience. Every spike, every drop, every moment of hesitation revealed something about my emotional state. The market became less of a teacher and more of a reflection. And I realized that's all it ever was. It's strange when you stop needing to win, you start seeing more clearly. When you stop idolizing the survivors, you start understanding yourself, because every chart hides 1,000 stories you'll never hear. Every candlestick carries the ghosts of traders who didn't make it. Their fear, their hope, their exhaustion, it's all in there, invisible but real. The market is a museum of human behavior, and every one of us leaves a trace behind. Sometimes I imagine what it would look like if we could see the full picture. If every chart showed not just price, but the number of dreams that broke along the way. Maybe then we'd trade differently. Maybe then we'd be gentler with ourselves. Because we'd realize that surviving this game doesn't make you better. It just means you're still here, still learning, still human. That's what I try to remember now. When I see another success story, I don't rush to copy it. I listen for the silence beneath it, the parts they don't mention, the losses they don't record, the emotions they've rewritten as lessons. I imagine the full version of their story, and it humbles me, because I know my story is no different. Some days I still catch myself romanticizing success. It's natural the mind loves tidy endings. But trading doesn't have endings. It just has cycles of winning, losing, learning, forgetting, and remembering again. And maybe the goal isn't to escape that cycle, but to become more aware each time you repeat it. Survivorship bias makes you believe there's a finish line. Awareness teaches you there isn't. There's only the next trade, the next decision, the next moment of truth. And in each of those moments, the question isn't, will I survive? It's, will I stay awake? Because survival without awareness is just luck. Awareness without ego, that's wisdom. When I think about it now, I realize that the ones who truly make it in trading aren't the richest or the most consistent. They're the ones who learn to see reality as it is, the full picture, not just the winner's side of it. They stop running from discomfort. They stop seeking validation from the stories of others. They start studying their own behavior like scientists, and through that, they find peace. Trading at its core is a mirror of consciousness. It reflects back everything you ignore about yourself: impatience, pride, fear, denial. And the moment you think you're past those things, the market reminds you no one is, not even the survivors. So when you find yourself learning from someone who's made it, listen, but listen carefully. Don't just absorb their confidence. Search for their humanity. Don't imitate their habits. Understand their perspective. And always ask yourself, what am I not seeing? What isn't being said? Those questions are the antidote to survivorship bias. They pull you out of imitation and into inquiry. They remind you that wisdom isn't found in the loud stories of success, but in the quiet spaces of reflection. Now, when I sit at my desk, I don't look for proof that I'm on the right path. I look for awareness of the path itself. Because the truth is, there is no single right path, only the one you're conscious enough to walk with honesty. And maybe that's what it really means to survive as a trader. Not to win more than others, but to stay awake long enough to learn from everything, the wins, the losses, the noise, and the silence in between. So when you see the next highlight reel, remember the unseen. When you hear the next success story, remember the silence that came before it. And when you look at your own journey, remember that awareness itself is survival. Because in the end, trading doesn't reward the ones who never fall. It rewards the ones who fall, see clearly, and rise not with more confidence, but with deeper humility. That's how you outgrow survivorship bias. By seeing the whole picture and realizing that every story, including yours, is still being written. Survivorship. Bias is everywhere. In the stories we share, in the advice we repeat, in the lessons we choose to remember. It convinces us that success has a formula, that those who made it did something we can copy. But the truth is far more fragile. Most of what we call wisdom is just what happened to survive. When you remember that something shifts, you stop chasing other people's endings and start honoring your own process. You learn to see value in the full picture, the light and the shadow, the triumph and the silence. Maybe that's what awareness really is, not knowing more but seeing more. And maybe survival in trading isn't about avoiding failure, but about staying conscious through it, long enough to learn, long enough to evolve, long enough to stay human. Because the market doesn't just test skill, it tests honesty. And the most honest traders aren't the ones who always win, they're the ones who never stop seeing. This is Mind Over Markets, where we don't glorify survival, we explore awareness. Until next time, trade calm, trade awake, trade human.